Hey there guys, welcome back. This is going to be the second of our video series here where we're tooling this tooling pattern that we did in the first video. If you haven't seen the first video, we took care of the push beveler, the undercuts, the flower centers, the flower center liner, and my crowners. And so if you haven't seen that video yet, there's a link down in the description where you can go and watch that one to catch up to where we are here. There's also a link in there if you would like the free copy of this pattern, and so that you can tool along with us through this video series. In this video series, we're going to go ahead and do the beveling, and we might get to the backgrounding. We're going to see how long the video takes, but we're predominantly going to focus on the beveling. The beveling will always be the longest part of your tooling session. And so when you sit down to tool, you're going to have a lot of tools that you're going to be using, but your bevelers are going to be the ones that will be in your hand the longest. So this video is going to be just going ahead and going through all of the beveling. So I do have 3 bevelers that I like to use, and so I've got kind of like my undercuts. They're going to be from small to large, so I've got a really small one. And this one is a Berry King small beveler. You can see it there how small that one is. And then I've got a second one. Now this one here is a craft tool. It's just an old craft tool that I came across years ago, and it's a very good tool. I really like this tool. It's a very old craft tool, I believe, and it is checkered. A lot of people ask me if I'm using checkered bevelers. I am. My Berry King is a checkered, so is my bigger one. But as you can see on this, how smooth and wore down that tool is, that's just from years of beveling with it. I really need to give up on it and get me a new set of bevelers for as far as a medium size, but I'm just really stuck on this little tool, and I like how it feels, I like how it tools, and so I just keep using it. The next beveler that I use is going to be a little bit wider, so you can see there how they step up from small to large. That's just mainly because what we're going to try to do when we're beveling is that my rule of thumb is always use the largest beveler that you can for any particular part. So we're going to work these bevelers just like we did our undercuts or our crowners, and that is we're going to grab one tool and do everything throughout the pattern that we can with that one tool. The only thing different with my bevelers than what I do with my undercuts is that my bevelers, I start with the largest tool and work my way back down to my smallest tool. So hopefully by the time we get to this small beveler, we're going to catch the majority of the pattern up with these two. Now for me, I don't use my large one very often, not on a pattern this size. A lot of these lines still have, even though they're what I would call long lines. If you've read our book on drawing floral patterns, I call them long lines. These I could get with this one, but it's just a little bit big yet on these patterns, on patterns of this size. So I pretty much just use these two. So in this pattern, we're going to use these two bevelers, the middle size or the medium size one, and then the small one. I'm not going to use the large one very much. That large one usually I'll use on a bigger floral pattern, a little bit bigger set where the composition is thicker and bigger flowers, bigger vines, and on a lot of our straight lines if I don't use a push beveler. And there are times that I don't use a push beveler for my hard borders. And also like things like brands or blocky type shapes that are really long straight lines, we'll use the big one. So we're going to go ahead and get started, and this is our medium beveler again. This one is a pretty steep angled. You can see there how steep it is. So these are pretty close to the same angle between the Berry King and this craft tool. My bigger beveler, that's another reason why I don't use it a whole lot, is that angle on this one is a lot more shallow, and so it's going to kind of mash down things that are real close together. So that's the deal. If you like steep bevelers, I sure do recommend them. They're really nice, especially on a pattern like this where things are really close together so that you don't mash down what's on the heel side of the tool. But you can certainly use any kind of standard beveler. If you're getting your bevelers from Berry King or even Clay Miller, they're gonna have a pretty good steep angle on them anyway, so you don't necessarily need to specify a steep beveler. But certainly if you're doing a lot of tiny patterns or want a little bit of a more sharp, deeper bevel, then you sure want to be sure that you've got enough angle on that. So let's go ahead and get started, and we're going to go ahead and begin the beveling on this and see how it goes. Okay guys, so this pattern, like I said before, we're up to the point now where I would go ahead and do all of my beveling. This will be a long session for me usually on any kind of pattern. This is where we're going to spend most of our time. If you'll notice in this, I don't know if you can see it in the video, but there is, when I pulled this, of course I cased it up. Like I said before, I actually drenched it and put it into, dunked it into water just because of the thickness that it is. It's 13-15 ounce skirting leather from Herman Oak. I tooled the first video session and everything, got that video done, put it in a bag, and this is the first time I'm back to it to work on the second video. And so it's been a couple of weeks since the last time I touched it, and it had a lot of mold on it. The thing is, do not freak out if you get a lot of mold on there. You certainly want to get it out of there, rinse it off, wipe it off, but it's really not going to hurt anything. But the longer you let it set, the more the mold will grow. If you are leaving it in a bag overnight, or like I did for 2 weeks, you will see some mold growth. It's not anything to really freak out about. I didn't really scrub this. Normally, you know, on a fender or something, sometimes I would, you know, wash it off really good, but then I get overcased. And so for the sake of time, I'm going to leave it. We won't notice it by the time we get this thing done. So we're going to go ahead and just leave it alone. So that's not something to freak out about if you do see a little bit of mold. What I like to do when I'm beveling, I do have a video on beveling. Just a real short video talking about beveling, and you can certainly reference that if this video isn't super clear or you want a little bit more information, but hopefully we cover everything in here. Now, the thing I like to do is just decide on a spot. I'll usually decide to start at the stump a lot of times on a pattern, and what I want to do is you want to kind of keep from having to turn your work every time you go to tool something. So what I like to do is just pick a spot where I'm going to start. It does not matter. Just start wherever you feel comfortable. I'm going to start on this stump, and I'm going to start on the outside. So we're going to come everything on the outside that I can see from here. And so we'll start here and start beveling, and then we'll move to the next line. And I'll show you why in a second. So one of the main things with bevelers when you're using them is that hitting the tool is what's actually moving the tool. So you can walk these bevelers as you're tooling, okay? You don't need to get into a deal where the bevelers are not meant to be operated like this, where you hit, move, hit, move, hit, move, hit, move. If you do that, you can see you get a lot of tick marks in there, what I call tick marks, or you get a track, and it's basically the side impressions of that tool. You don't want that. So what you want is you want a nice smooth glide as you're walking that tool, and so it's called walking the tool. And you want it the way I do that when I'm walking any tool, whether it's a pear shader or a beveler. Any of the tools that you kind of hit and move with, is when I'm doing that is I hold my tool like this when I'm tooling. So my thumb is acting as pressure against the tool to keep it forced up against these three fingers. So I'm squeezing the tool and pushing with my thumb, okay? This finger here is what's actually on the leather. So this finger is touching the leather, and these other two are guiding the tool. So I've kind of got my thumb in between my index and my middle finger, and then this ring finger is actually on the surface of the leather. It's it just takes a feel. You've got to kind of get to where you feel comfortable, hold the tool the way you feel comfortable, but that's how I do it. I can kind of guide where this tool is going because my pinky is on the leather, if you can see that. So as I'm guiding my finger around, my pinky is actually giving me another point of stabilization here. And so as we go along, I can kind of roll that way. So when you're walking this tool, you've got your pinky on there on the surface of the leather, your ring fingers on the surface, and you're stabilizing the tool with those two fingers there, your index and your middle finger. Then the tool actually, like I've got the toe down into the cut, but it's not just free hanging out over there, okay? It's in there. So it's on top of the leather, but it's so that I can walk it, so I can slide that tool along the leather. Some guys will actually hold it up above the leather a little bit and let it piston down. I like to put it in my cut and then slide it along the cut as I'm beveling. And so you can see how far apart these two fingers are stretched here. The pinky is staying stationary on the work surface, and I'm allowed to even step out a little bit with my ring finger. If it's in a cut, you can let go of this finger because it'll help to guide that tool along in that cut. But that's what allows me to kind of bevel there, and I'll just stretch out and then I'll reposition and then come. So you're actually kind of walking the tool, okay? So when I'm going along, I start and I start tapping. Each tap, I'm giving it a little bit of pressure to walk. So as I hit the tool, it moves, okay? So it's on the leather and then it's moving. And so what you want is a nice consistent repetition with your mallet, and you don't need to just really get crazy on it and beat the heck out of it. You just need a nice little tap with your mallet, and you can walk and push this tool down in that cut that you made. And then as you get to the end, you can kind of start letting off the strength of your mallet. So again, we'll start here. We're in the cut, and then every time I hit it, it releases a little bit to where I can guide that tool down into that swivel knife cut. So if you watch here, I'm able to just kind of really stabilize that tool down in that swivel knife cut and walk it around. Walk it down that line. That toe is actually down in the cut. It's not hovering over the top of it. It's actually down in the cut, and then all I'm doing is guiding that tool. And this pinky is what's giving me my stability. And this ring finger here helps to just control and keep it in the cut. And so it's about the same pressure off of the top of the surface. Both my ring finger and the tip of that tool, or the toe of that beveler, are touching the leather, but they're not forced. I'm not forcing down. All I'm doing is guiding as it's sliding. So as you can see right there, it's sliding along in the cut. These three fingers here are what's holding that tool in place. So that tool is held there, and I'm putting pressure with my thumb and pulling a little bit with these. And so as I'm going along, all I've got to do is guide it. And once you do this a little bit, you kind of practice and get a feel for it. Everybody's got a different way of doing it, but as you do that, you'll kind of notice that with every hit, that tool naturally wants to step forward. So if you notice, whenever we're beveling on the outside, we're going away from our hand. Okay, we're beveling away from us. You can go a lot further distance when you're doing that. So there's two ways that you bevel. You're going to bevel towards your hand like this, or away from your hand like that. The thing that you'll notice when you're doing that is that when you're beveling away from your hand, you can go a lot further on your tool by dropping your ring finger down and adding to your stability. You can kind of stretch your hand out a little further and make a lot further distance. If you're beveling towards your hand, you don't have quite as much distance that you can cover before you have to move your hand. Okay, it's not that big of a deal, but you'll be going both directions depending on the vine work. So like on the outside of the vines, I'm going to go away from my hand. I'm going to be beveling away all the way around, because that's the direction that lends itself to going. Okay, that's the way the vines are. And then as I get to the inside of this, I'm going to bevel towards my hand. The main reason for that is it has to do with the directions of the vines, but for me, I always start at the deeper end of our cut. And what I mean by that is, if you got a pattern here, you're going to bevel really deep at the front or the tip of the vine, and then as all these lines converge right in here, right? As you get closer to the tail end or to the end of a line, then you start fading back, because you don't want this line to stop hard. So as this line right here, we don't want it to end like this. You never want your lines looking like that, okay? You never want them to be just the same depth all the way down and then they just stop. They just dead end and stop right there. Because that right there draws the eye, and that also tells the viewer that that line is done, okay? And so it's just not very pleasing. So what you want to do instead is you want to roll that line out. So if we do this one here, we're going to start very deep with our bevel, because that's the front or the tip of the vine. And then as we get back here in the back towards the tail of it, we'll start letting up a little bit and just really float that out. And so now I even kind of just drag tip of my, it just gives you a little line right there. So now if you look at these two lines, this one compared to this second line here, you can see how this one just fades out to almost nothing, and versus this one just stops. and that just stands out. I mean, if you're looking at these, this one you don't even hardly notice that it ends. This one here just screams at you and says, hey, I'm done. And so that's just not very pleasing right there on that first line. So all of your lines, as you get to the end of the tails or the ends of your lines that you're beveling, you always want to float those out to where they're not so abrasive. You don't want them to make just a real hard stop. You want it to kind of float out. And see how much better that looks? Now that line kind of disappears and floats out. And that's what we want to do, because all these lines are converging together and kind of disappearing and then making this one beam. So you want them to kind of just fade out real soft. You don't want them very, very abrupt. Now a place where I don't do that as much is in my flowers. So if you notice on this one, when we came in here, I kind of let up a little bit right before the flower center. You definitely want to stay away from the flower center and not get too much in there and mess it up. But I kind of go a little bit more evenly in depth as I get to the flower center, but I do let up just a little bit. And there are times like on this leaf right here. So as we bevel this line here on this leaf, we're going to do it the same depth all the way around, because this is actually intersecting this stem or vein of this leaf. So with this line here, we will bring it completely in and the same depth all the way around. Because this is what we call a primary element, and so as we tool it, we want those to stand out. They're focal points in the pattern. They're put in place to catch the viewer's eye, to draw a little bit of attention. It's a feature of the pattern. It's not secondary, it's primary. So we want it to kind of stand out. So I want to be sure that there's a good indication between this leaf and all the rest of this fill, or what I call fill. And so we want to be sure that this whole side of that leaf really stands up. And so I'm going to go ahead and spray this just a little bit, because it's gotten a little bit dry. So like I was saying, as far as whenever you are beveling, I try to work. So when we did this, when we started here at the stump, and I worked out this line, and then I came to this line, and then I jumped over here and did this line, because they're all cascading, okay? But what I mean by cascading lines is we're going to bevel the outside here. We're sitting from this position, so from the viewer's point of view, I can bevel this with my beveler toe facing me, bevel this line. Then the next line is right behind it, we'll bevel this line. Then the next line right behind that is this line, which comes up into here. And then the next line is here. So I just kind of cascade back away from me and twist my work just a little bit as I go around and catch all the lines that I can, until we're all the way back over here and we've gotten all those lines. Now, when we're back here, now we can come onto the inside of this circle, and we catch this line here, because now it's facing us, and so we can put our beveler in there and bevel that line, bevel that line, bevel that line, and as we go, we're just cascading away from us again. And so the reason for that is, if we were to bevel this line first here, and then come in here and bevel this line, there's a good chance that all that hard work that we did on our beveling is going to squash down this line we just beveled. See how squashed that looks? Now we've got to go back and step back, pick that up, clean it up, and then come over here and bevel this one. This line's going to do the same thing to this line, so then we'll catch it up and clean it up, and then we'll probably mess this one up again, so I have to go back and catch this one up and clean it up. And so it's just better if you don't touch any of them and just work your way away from you, so that the line behind the beveler hasn't been beveled yet, is the easiest way I can think to explain it to you. So it'd be something like on, let me find another spot, so something like here. So if we bevel this is the inside of the circle. If you'll notice, on the inside of this circle, we're going away from our hand, beveling away from our hand. That's just the direction that line is going. So you need to be able to do both. You need to be able to bevel to you and away from you. So now we get this next line. And then we'll come over here and get this next line. again, we'll start out deep, hitting the beveler with good intention so that it makes a nice deep bevel, and then as we get to the tail, we just kind of float it out and we start gradually fading it to where we're not beveling as deep. And that's going to give us a nice feather and a nice transition to where the vine just kind of disappears. So now if you look, we beveled this one, then this one, then this one, then this one, then this one. So that way, behind the beveler, at the heel of the beveler, any line behind that beveler as we were using it, this line hadn't been done yet. So as we were coming here, this line was still just carved. So then we step up, bevel that, this line hadn't been carved. So when we get done, we step over here. So you're cascading away so that you're never beveling where you're going to chance messing up something you just beveled. And because these bevelers, as they get close to, as these lines get really close to each other, you end up getting that squashed effect. So you always want to work away from you, or what I call cascading lines. So here again, we're going to want to bevel this side of this line right here, so the side away from us. So we're going to bevel this one first, then this one, then this one. All three of these lines are super close together. If we started here, we'd bevel, bevel, clean up, bevel, clean up, clean up. We'd have to keep stepping back because the beveler is going, if you do bevel this line first and this one, you're going to squash all your beveling down. So don't even worry about it till you get this one done. So this one, this one, this one. So we kind of go away from us. I hope that makes sense. It's not really that hard when you think about it and you actually get to beveling. And if you get to where you do it wrong, you'll know why, because then you'll look back and you'll have to be like, well, I got to fix that, and I got to fix that, and you'll notice how many times you're stepping back to clean something up. And the way I look at tooling is you've got ample opportunity, even in a small pattern, small being like a wallet or something. You've got so much time to practice your beveling. You don't need extra time. You don't need to create more work for yourself and make the project last longer than it needs to. So I want to bevel everything once. I don't want to have to come back and re-bevel and re-clean and reshape and all that. That's why we use our undercuts. That's why we use our crowners. That's why we use our bevelers in the way we do. And that's why I'm trying to show you exactly the cadence or the process and how and why I bevel certain lines before other ones. And it's just to keep you from having to go back and do your work over again. So see, I went up inside that leaf right there. I went in there and started that vein coming out of there. The reason I did is because we got 1, 2, 3, 4. All these lines are together. So I want to work from the middle all the way out, and then we'll turn our bevel around and work all the way out that way. And see, all that beveling, I haven't done anything to hurt this line right here because it's just carved. So now when we grab this one, we can bevel that line and push that line as close as we want. We can bevel it as deep as we want to, and we're not going to affect this one in the front. Another place that you want to be sure and bevel the same depth, or at least get a nice crisp bevel, is when you're bumping up against your hard border. So like on this little line right here, I went ahead and beveled pretty deep right up against here because we're imagining that this line actually comes out here and then comes back. Okay, so there's just a bit that's underneath this border. So I want to go ahead and bevel kind of deep there. It's not that crucial. I'm just showing you a little bit of the finesse things that I do, just trying to keep the appearance of what we're going for, and so that's just something to keep in mind, because basically your beveling is your shading. So you're wanting to create depth and create structure and add depth to the forms that you're tooling. And so you got to kind of think of, is this what's on top of what's behind what? That's what we're kind of looking at. So obviously, we're wanting to push certain things back into the background further than others, and so you've just got to kind of figure out on your pattern and what you're tooling, what you're wanting it to look like. And like I said, usually on most of the floral patterns that I tool, I will almost always, not always, nothing's always, you can always change it, do it different things, but most of the time I will start my beveling for a certain, you know, circle or on a belt, a linear pattern or something. I'll almost always start my beveling at the flower and at the stump. And the reason is, again, because we got to bevel this line before this line before this line before this line. You see, so we're cascading away from us, and so the stump is where it all starts. So that's just where I start, and that way it's easier to float through that. And on these tails, be sure and keep them kind of straight. I got a little off on that one, but you want to keep them following your path. You know, you do a good job of carving these patterns. You want to be sure that your beveling doesn't wreck them. So just be sure that your beveling is adding to the illusion of motion and not taking away. See, you see right there how I got off? My line's right over here and I beveled over there. That's going to happen. It happens to everybody. So it's just one of them deals. Sometimes you got to be just kind of tender with it and force her back over where you want it, and that way you can keep it clean so that it doesn't, you know, you get off a little bit, you can always fix it with your beveler usually. Just kind of go back and re-bevel it. And as you can notice on this little piece, I've got a little bevel overage right there, but we'll probably use a mule's foot somewhere in there. Those kind of little things are going to happen no matter how long you tool or how long you've been tooling or whatever. So just give yourself a little bit of grace right there, because it's going to happen. By the time we get done with this whole pattern, it'd be hard to pick out that one little spot, you know, right there that you kind of got off on a little bit. Can wow them with the overall beauty of your pattern, where they can't pick out the screw up, so to speak. And then, so as you'll notice, as I'm beveling, I will go ahead and get not only my long lines, but I'm also going to get some of these shorter ones that I can fit. If I can fit it in there with my beveler, as long as the beveler fits, you can go ahead and catch it. So basically, we're trying to catch every bit of beveling that we can with this medium-sized beveler that we're using right now. And so if you got a spot, it doesn't matter what kind of line it is, like this one right here. You know, if you look at that little line right there, I can fit this beveler in there. As long as it's not going to damage what's around it that you've already beveled, then go ahead and get it. See, as you can see there, I was able to do that, and I didn't mess up this line here or this one. So definitely don't be worried about, you know, what you shouldn't bevel. As long as the beveler fits, or as long as the tool fits, and you know it's what you've got in your hand at that time, you can go ahead and catch it. It's one less thing you're going to have to worry about with a small beveler. So absolutely go ahead and bevel what you can while you're there. So like I said before, your beveling will get better and better as you go, but the one thing you want to try to focus on is getting just as proficient pushing that beveler away from you as beveling towards your hand, okay? Because that's going to allow you to keep from having to turn your work quite as often. And on a little pattern like this, I don't worry about it a whole lot. A lot of times I'll bounce around. You'll see me spinning this pattern around quite a bit on the bench. But as small as it is, I'm just kind of going along, and it's not hurting me too much to try to spin it, but I try to have it stay in one position as long as possible. But certainly if I'm tooling a fender, or especially like a saddle seat or a rope bag, you've got to really get to where you can bevel from all kinds of different angles, and that way you're not having to spin that big piece of material on your bench as often, because that definitely can slow you down. So I usually just pick out lines that I can get from where I'm sitting, or my point of view at that moment, and then just only turn whenever I have to. And again, a lot of that comes with practice and your comfort level of the tools, and how many times you mind or don't mind turning your work. Certainly you'll see me go back and re-bevel and touch up some spots. Now's the time to do that. You know, we don't want to get to the very end and then try to scan a completely tooled pattern looking for areas we could have feathered out a little bit more or straightened up a little bit more or anything like that. Take the time to do that now while the tool's in your hand, and that way when we put this tool down, we're done with it. And plus, it's a lot easier to see these lines before all the other tools are put in there. It's just a little cleaner and a little more open to where you can pick little imperfections out or little areas out that you can improve on. And if you'll notice, as I'm beveling, I'm not just beating the heck out of my tools. You know, it's a nice firm tap with the maul, and it's at a good cadence. It's not going, you know, I'm not trying to go super fast. I'm not trying to just really whack the tool really hard. We're just trying to get a good impression. Let your beveler do its job, and its job is to bevel and to go at a certain depth. And if you're giving it a decent tap with that maul, it should do its job really well and tool at the same depth, and so that everything looks like it should. A lot of guys start out beveling and they want to just really beat the snot out of the tool and get real deep impressions and all that, and a lot of times what happens is you get more of a mushy look and lines that are distorted and they're not where they originally were carved. You've shifted them around, and so we want to keep from doing that. I like to think a lot of times that, you know, your depth will increase, and the 3D depth that you want, that you're going for, that'll come with more practice and finesse and familiarity with the tool than it will from sheer force. So I'd rather see a very clean beveled, very clean carved, and smoothly executed pattern that's a little shallow than I would one that's really deep tooled but very clumsy looking, very distorted, and not real smooth. Okay, so work on those attributes first, and the depth and speed of your beveling will come later as you get more confident with the tool. You can start increasing the strength of the maul when you're tapping on the tool. Again, we'll clean up a little bit of this area here. Got a little mushed up. Okay, so in this, we've gotten all of our lines for our vine work, except for a few of the bigger ones, a few of the shorter lines. We'll go ahead and catch those now. But what I'm also going to do is I'm going to catch my flower. I usually bevel my flowers before I do any vine work, at least these main lines that run in here, and we kind of started on that flower there. But for this video, I'm kind of getting off off kilter just a little bit, but we're going to go in there now and catch all these longer portions of this flower, of all of our flowers. Go ahead and get those. And remember, when you're beveling on a flower, it just depends on the flower. It depends what you're looking for. I tend to have a lot of separation between my petals, so I bevel pretty heavy towards the flower center without hitting the flower center. I don't want to distort anything that I've got going on there. But I tend to bevel a little bit more even. I don't feather it quite as much as when I get to the flower center as I do on the ends of my vine work. And it just depends on the flower. Some flowers I do, some I don't. It just kind of depends on what we're going for. But I want a good separation of each petal. I want them to look like individual petals of the flower, so that's why I'm doing that here. But when I'm beveling, I tend to usually tool, you know, my flowers, my leaves, any characters, you know, say brand, stuff like that. I tool all of those individually, then come back and do vine work. And I just kind of separate the aspects of the pattern in my mind. Kind of divide and conquer sort of situation there whenever I'm tooling. And you can certainly do it whatever's more comfortable for you. Alright, and so now I'm just going to go and catch as many of the short lines that are big enough that I can get with this beveler. And that's just going to cut down on anything that we have to do with a small beveler. You've got to remember, you know, the small beveler, you've got to hit a lot more times than you do a larger one. So we always want to catch as much as we can with our biggest bevelers first. And that'll just cut down on the amount of tapping that you have to do. So a lot of times within the vine work, I can usually get a lot of the short lines for those. So again, your tooling can definitely be improved the more you know how to draw a pattern, okay? So drawing your own patterns can definitely improve your tooling because you know already what the pattern, what you're going for, and kind of where you want it going over something or over something. I mean, it's one thing to trace off a pattern, and that's certainly fine. We all do that. I still trace off some of my patterns occasionally. There's nothing wrong with that, but just understanding why things are drawn the way they are will definitely help you with your when it comes to the tooling, especially the beveling, because there's a lot of that stays in your mind that you already know why you're beveling it that way instead of the other way. And those are some of the things that can be lost if you don't understand some of the least basic concepts of pattern design. So I highly suggest that it be a goal, and it'll be a lifetime goal, because it takes, you never completely know everything there is about pattern design, but there's needs to be some work put into drawing them as well. Just if anything to help with the tooling. Your tooling will improve quite a bit the better you get at drawing your own patterns. Okay, so we got all that done with the medium-sized beveler, and so now all we've got to do is go in and clean up, and we're going to clean up smaller areas like this little pod right here, just anywhere we couldn't quite get with that big beveler, the medium-sized one. Because remember, you don't want to try to force a tool into a spot that it doesn't fit, because you'll end up just kind of mashing it up and kind of ultimately destroying some of the good knife work that you did with your swivel knife. So we want to be sure and only use the proper tool for each job. So we're going to go ahead and go in with our small Berry King beveler, and we're going to catch all the little small pieces now. And so this is the time too where you can come in and do a little bit more finesse work if you've got a vine that's overlapping something or some place there that you just want to kind of clean up and make sure it's defined really well. You can usually make some really nice adjustments with a real small beveler and not do any damage to the work you've already done. So now would be the time to kind of do that. And again, I had a few of these little scallops on this particular flower that smaller crowner wouldn't quite get, so I left them. And I'm having to get them now with my little beveler. And even though I'm only getting a few of them, the majority of them we were able to get with the crowners. You can see how much time I'm spending on those. So if you can imagine not using crowners, and I didn't use them for years, so I can definitely imagine, you know, having to do every one of those little scallops with a tiny beveler. It takes a considerable amount of more time, and so the crowners are definitely a lifesaver. And if I was smart, I would just draw these patterns where every scallop fits my crowners, but I get a little sloppy and tend to just freestyle it and make it work when I go to tool it when I'm drawing patterns, so I'm not really keeping my tools too much at the front of mind. A couple little spots of beveler may have mashed down a scallop a little bit or something. We'll go ahead and clean that up right now. Because when we background this, we don't want to have to come back in and re-bevel or anything else. We want the beveling to be done. So now's the time to make any of the little adjustments and little fine detail changes. Alright, so that's all of our beveling, and we've gone through, again real quick, we've gone through I have three. Remember, I use 3 bevelers. I use a large. Now again, this is just like a little craft tool, and then I have another little craft tool that's a medium-sized beveler, and then I have my Berry King small beveler. We'll be replacing these two eventually, but right now I'm still kind of attached to them. But those are the 3 that I used. I didn't really use a big one on this pattern because of the size. There really was no need, and so we just used these 2. Now remember, I do run my bevelers backwards. I run from the largest that I can use down to the smallest. Cuts down a lot of time doing it that way. And now real quick, we'll go ahead and do the backgrounding. Now, like I said, we do have a video on beveling, another little tutorial video. We'll put a link to that in the description. But this is probably more expensive than that one, but you can sure check that one out as well. And we also have one on bar grounding, so we're going to put a link to that one as well. But here we're going to go ahead and bar ground this particular piece. Now the one thing when it comes to casing, you've seen in this, I've occasionally sprayed this piece here. It's been cased and everything, and but I have sprayed it a couple times to maintain the water level that we had going on. Because I like it to be fairly dry. When in doubt, my recommendation is tool it drier than you think. A lot of new craftsmen especially will tool their leather, especially the beveling part, way too wet. And if you do that, you won't get a nice crisp bevel where the line stays where it's supposed to be, and you just push down what you're wanting to bevel. And sometimes you can lose some of your depth. So I will tool it a lot drier than what most people think it needs to be. The other thing is that as I get towards the end of my beveling, I prefer the leather to be fairly dry because we're going to bar ground now, and I don't want it overly wet when we're bar grounding. It makes it very difficult to keep your bar grounding from looking mushy. Now if you're using just a standard matting tool for your background, that's absolutely fine, but I would also recommend doing that drier as well. You'll get a lot less mushy look in your background. And so as you can see on this piece here, we're kind of getting a little dry. It's actually For my liking, it's actually maybe a tick wet in some areas for the backgrounding, but it's absolutely fine. We can go ahead and tool it the way it is. So we're going to bar ground this, and like I said, just try to keep it just a little bit on the drier side when you're bar grounding. And so when I'm bar grounding, I just kind of start anywhere. It really doesn't matter. All we're going to do is just background everything that's not beveled. You know, everything that we tried to push down with the beveler, we're going to background that. And if you watch our backgrounding video, try to adjust this just a little bit so maybe you can see a little bit better. I tend to start and fan out. So I'll start here and fan this over, and then down to where my tool is pointing down into that crack, and then I can just catch up these two. The trick with it is to try not to hit it too many times. The more you hit it, the more mushy it gets. So you want to position your tool and cascade through there, hitting it the least amount as possible. Okay, you don't want to have to go in there and reposition a bunch of times and overlap when you're setting these stamps in here. Because the more you hit this thing, I mean, it will turn to hamburger. So you want to be sure that you're hitting it the least amount of times that you can. And that just takes a little bit of practice, figure out the best position of the tool. Like on an area like this, I will point the tool towards the border and then slightly turn it so that when I get to this other vine, I'm basically parallel with it. And that way, now I can come in here and in a couple hits, I can clear up that little bit up in here. And so that's just kind of how I found to do it. That's leaves the cleanest impression. And then when you get into something that's got a little curve to it, like this little flap here where it's kind of curved, I just try not to get in there too far. We're going to go back and re-lift that and re-undercut that later. So any background pieces that are in there, you're going to mash them down anyway, so it's okay if you leave them a little bit out right there. And I will still occasionally use a matting tool. There's certainly nothing wrong with a matter. I prefer the bar grounder myself. Once I learned how to run one, I really liked them. But a matting tool surely has its place, and it does give a neat effect to your background. It just kind of depends on what kind of look you're going for. And you can see as we background this, the better job you do of beveling to where you've got a nice, crisp, sufficiently deep bevel edge there, you can kind of rest that backgrounding tool up against that border, so to speak, and just right along inside there and mash down what you were trying to push down with the beveler. So it makes it a lot easier to background stuff whenever they're beveled correctly. And so I'm going in right now. I didn't talk about these, but real quick, on the Bargrounders, they usually come in a set, and they're a 3, a 5, and a 7, I believe. Different lengths of the tool. I hardly ever use the real long one. I just don't like on this particular one. The Backgrounders that I'm using are 45s from Barry King, and I think he's got some of the best Bargrounders that I've used. But the 45s are what I use on predominantly everything. I've also got a set of, I'm not sure, these are 30s. And 30s would certainly work for a pattern this size. I just prefer the little bit bigger one. It seems to bevel a little bit cleaner. If I'm doing something in thin leather, I'll usually use the 30s. But on thicker leather like this, it just goes in a little bit too deep, and I seem to get it a little bit more mushy than I do with the 45s. And so the 45s are what I'm using on this project. And particularly, like I said, I'll hardly ever use this big long one. It just doesn't stamp as well on certain things as I'd like it to, so I use the 5 and the 3. And we'll use, obviously, the biggest one we can first, just like the beveler. We'll go through and use these, and then come back in and clean up whatever we can't with the little number 3, and pick up those other little bitty pieces. So as you can see, we were able to get almost all of the background with just that number 5 bar grounder. And so now we're going to take our number 3 and just get a few spots. We got one there, and I thought I saw another one over here, but that may be the only little spot we weren't able to get. And that's usually the way it happens. I may be weird, but I genuinely like backgrounding. It's kind of one of my favorite parts of the tooling process. There's a little spot. Because it that's when the pattern really starts to pop out, and to me, at least for me, that's the only time when I know how much background I'm going to have. Like I've done it long enough where I kind of know how to draw it, where I'm not going to have too much background. But at this stage right here, it always seems like your background is huge pieces. Like there's a lot of background. Man, I should have drawn it a little tighter. And but once we do the rest of the tooling and add in the pear shading and all the other pieces, it tends to tone down a little bit of the background. So, but this is one of my favorite parts. It just kind of seems like the pattern's starting to come to life, and I'm starting to see a little bit more of my vision for the pattern once I've backgrounded it. And all right, guys, so that's this video here, number 2 of this little series. And in this one we did the beveling with the bevelers. So I used a medium-sized beveler and a small beveler. And then we were able to get all that done, and then we did the backgrounding. The backgrounding, I was using the 45 Berry King Bargrounders in the size 5 and 3. And so if you were to buy a set of those, you could certainly buy just the number 3 and the 5. So whoever you're going to buy your Bargrounders from, there's a lot of good custom tool makers making some good ones. I haven't had real good luck with the craft tool ones. That's just been my personal experience. Maybe I just didn't have a good set. But I would definitely, they're worth the investment to get a good set of bar grinders, no matter who you get them from. But I would definitely get a handmade pair, and they'll last you forever, and they just do a really nice job. But you could definitely get away with just getting 2 of them, the 3 and the 5. You don't necessarily need the 7. It's something nice to have if you have it, but I hardly ever use mine, honestly. So I really wouldn't fret too much about being sure to get all 3 of them. But a lot of times they're sold in sets, so. But that's this video. So in the next video, we'll go ahead. I'm not sure how I'm going to break it down, but we're going to cover for sure the pear shading. That would be my next step after this. We would go ahead and mist this down a little bit more. I'm going to go ahead and recase it and put it in a bag till we film the next video. But I would mist it just a little bit because it is dry, a little bit too dry for me for doing the pear shading. And so, but that would be my next step, would be all the pear shading, and then we'll do leaf liners and stuff in here, and starting to give this pattern a little more depth and a little bit more movement and stuff in there. And so that's what we'll do in the next video. So I appreciate you guys watching. If you have any questions, let me know. Remember the very first video, the video before this, where we do the crowners and all the other stuff to get this pattern started. There's a link for that down in the description, and any other links that we mentioned will be down there as well. And the pattern for this is free, and there's a link in the description below. All you gotta do is put your email address in, and we'll shoot that pattern right over to you. And you can print it out and transfer it to a piece of leather and tool along with us. So look forward to the next video, guys. I appreciate it. If you got any questions, email me, and thank y'all.